Why isn't remote work advertised as a pro-environment initiative? No form of transport requires less energy than telecommuting. Why aren't there Zoom/MS Teams/Slack billboards on 101 and 880? Where is everyone's outrage at needlessly requiring people to move themselves into offices and the congestion, waste, and environmental damage it causes? Because corporations are doing the majority of that pro-environmental advertising. I mean that both in terms of companies making changes, both real and greenwashing, and the news/media corporations reporting on it. Telecommuting could be absolutely massive for reduced emissions, could bring down urban house prices, improve inter-family relationships, and revitalize suburban neighborhoods, for example more walkable areas. Plus increase wealth to relatively poor rural areas. Even some corporations are starting to realize that telecommuting isn't their enemy, but large ships move slowly, and recently we've been seeing a lot of return to work used as a way to conduct layoffs with lower negative PR/stock tanking. This isn't a byproduct but a goal of return to work. For example, see Musk's text message conversation during Twitter lawsuit discovery. Greater than Musk's text message conversation during Twitter lawsuit discovery. I only saw this now. It's actually kind of incredible how it all seems to work. The cringe 2 of the fawning is a good indicator why Musk feels he can do whatever he likes, including attempting to troll everyone on his board. It seems so juvenile. I don't intend to derail the convo, but this is an important one. Improve inter-family relationships. It could, maybe, but it can also be a significant source of strife. It's tough spending all day, every day with someone. Because of that, you find that people are either looking for larger homes in order to have private workspaces or renting office space. Both of those shift the cost burden from the company to the individual. Exactly this is the reason, but I'll go even further and say that no corporation will advertise something green that might require actual effort on their part. The clear fact is that environmental impact is almost entirely the fault of corporations. Advertising for consumers to do anything to impact this is distracting them from the real issue. The corporation's advertising to the M. It is for this reason that you will never find anything that makes sense advertised as green or efficient. Corporations are things that exist solely to exploit. Nothing in their core impulses moves them to be kind or understanding. Anything that makes it seem otherwise must be regarded with suspicion. Greater than and revitalize suburban neighborhoods, for example more walkable areas without other changes. This would not happen, in the US at least. The default would be every more cookie-cutter suburban sprawl, with the cul-de-sac Y construction of these neighborhoods creating a more labyrinthian, difficult-to-walk place to live. Until there is more mixed-use zoning in the US, with high enough density to justify frequent public transit arrival times, WFH would only save the car and infra wear and tear, and pollution level, from commuting, but it would not necessarily create a third place automatically. We need to learn that corporations care even less about the environment than they care about remote work. Invoking the environment to gain their support of remote work is just misunderstanding their priorities. The game is to make remote work attractive to them. You think Elon Musk wants to hear your spiel about the environment? Or does he want you to get back into your office and work a 16-hour day? If we want to get corporate America on the side of remote work, then we need to do it with dollars and cents. Not indirect savings, not improved morale, but concrete examples of how remote work is increasing their profit. Even better would be if it could increase their revenue as well. That would be a slam dunk. We almost got there with the idea of lowering rent costs after the pandemic, but now it just seems that the idea of getting rid of office space in favor of remote work is getting a lot of pushback. Maybe even backlash would be a better term. There is nothing more illogical in modern society than commuting to an office every day. Employees waste 2 of their 16 available waking hours in the non-productive commute while incurring significant financial costs, lease/insurance/fuel/energy, in order to support this patently absurd activity. Employers waste time and energy negotiating leases, rearranging offices, purchasing AV equipment for meeting rooms, etc., in addition to paying the likely enormously expensive lease itself. The impacts on the environment, the number of hours of human life wasted in commute, the pointless buildings and associated costs to employers as well as the public infrastructure to support it, roads, trains, buses, etc., are all incredibly wasteful. Surely, all of this could only be justified if physical presence had a dramatic impact on productivity. Yet, we cannot tell one way or the other if it actually improves outcomes. Greater than employees waste 2 of their 16 available waking hours in the non-productive commute while incurring significant financial costs, lease/insurance/fuel/energy, in order to support this patently absurd activity. Is not patently absurd, it obviously brings some benefit to their life to choose this, you're just ignoring those benefits to focus solely on the time and energy costs, which people gladly trade away in order to achieve these other benefits. Greater than the impacts on the environment, the number of hours of human life wasted in commute, the pointless buildings and associated costs to employers as well as the public infrastructure to support it, roads, trains, buses, etc., are all incredibly wasteful. This view is solely focused on the information economy, and really doesn't make any sense once you start adding in light commercial or industrial activity. We built this infrastructure for a reason, and it wasn't solely to create a trap for white-collar workers. Greater than yet, we cannot tell one way or the other if it actually improves outcomes. This is probably because most people do not view their lives as part of some giant min-max game designed to provide maximum benefit to everyone other than themselves. New York has one of the worst commute situations in the country, with an average of 36 minutes each way. The US average is 27 minutes. People commuting 2 hours a day are extreme outliers. Greater than surely, all of this could only be justified if physical presence had a dramatic impact on productivity. Yet, we cannot tell one way or the other if it actually improves outcomes. You can flip that around too. If remote work was so great for productivity, all companies would switch to it? There really isn't any point arguing over it, because it doesn't change the current state of affairs. My belief is that for remote work to gain mainstream adoption, you'll need a few trailblazer companies who establish a model of remote work where you can get everything done remotely, team building, motivating people, etc., etc. Very true. And I did some rough estimations on why my employer wants us in the office. They make $115,000 a month of employees buying coffee. That is only coffee, and that was a very conservative estimate of only 40% of employees buying only a coffee on an average of $2. This doesn't take into account parking we have to pay for, or lunch, or snacks. What we really need is a more flexible time to leave. I come in at 8 a.m. and leave at 2 p.m., when my commute is about 1/4 what it is during rush hour. Then I hop on for another couple of hours after dinner. This type of flexibility gives me the best of both worlds. I get to go into the office because I love it, and hate work from home, and I skip the commute. In most cases, yes, but for me it's a 20-minute bike ride that arguably increases my health, and it enables face-to-face conversation with coworkers that video meetings aren't a real substitute for. I say that after 2 years of having those. I wouldn't want to miss that. What we, as a society, should do, is to increase the possibility of working in walking or biking distance. It really depends on where you live. My Fortune 100 high-tech job has a 10-minute commute if I hit the lights right. Maybe the illogical issue is people living in high-density massive population centers. To add, I live on a nice tree-lined street within walking distance of local schools and shopping. I don't live in some apartment near my place of employment. 2 main problems. 1. Middle and senior management who don't want to lose control or be rendered less effective. 2. Engineers who are not trained in written communication and largely cannot autonomously move a group towards a goal without a lot of supervision. If you solve for no 2, then that acts counter to no 1, because middle management will be questioned, why do we need you? If a group of engineers can function on their own towards a common goal, then the manager's role is more or less rendered redundant. Sure, there may be a need for psychological support, but you surely won't need the current ratio of engineers, managers. There is a deep-rooted old-school interest in staying physically connected. This won't go away anytime soon. I am not debating whether that is right or wrong, but the general notion that we are better if we are physically together still persists. I don't know if this is a genuine feel-good together feeling or just a made-up emotion to mask point no one above. I am flummoxed by how executive leadership is simply blind to these facts in most companies. I mean, the CEO can declare a fully remote constraint, sort of like the exact opposite of what Musk did at Twitter, and drive productivity higher. The cynic in me says execs can't force this decision because the senior management simply will come back and say we cannot be this productive with a fully remote team anymore. I don't know, but I for one cannot understand the irrational exuberance behind RTO. I think this is mostly right. Within your point number 1, I see the problem as more to do with senior management. Specifically, I think the major disconnect is not so much between middle managers and ICs, it's between executives and the rest of the org. Unfortunately, I'm beginning to think that this is truly a case of misaligned incentives that may prove hard to fix. What I mean is that executives are directly incentivized to be in the office. Almost all of their career capital is tied up in relationships and patterns of decision-making with other executives. Good day for a manager or IC. Wow, I really got a lot done today and I'm moving the team goals forward. Good day for an executive. The conversation with Dan and Steve went really well. I also think that junior new engineers are less productive remote, because they can't absorb the context and experience of their more senior coworkers. Probably the only group made more productive are senior independent engineers. This kind of a comment where middle and senior management will be rendered useless, and therefore feel threatened, by communication competent engineers is both prevalent on HN and absurdly wrong from a business organization perspective. Joel Spolsky's writing on this subject should be mandatory reading before people spout nonsense. If this is a website supposedly for startups, the audience missed that mark by a wide margin. From my experiences, everywhere from full office to full WFH, even in heavily technical low management environments, it still feels more productive to do any of the planning stuff in person. In my case, small percentage of total time, and making the 5% more effective to make the remaining 95% less effective doesn't seem like good trade-off. Just not having co-workers interrupt me because I'm near and know the answer is a blessing. But from manager position I can see that, my 5 to 10% spent on meetings and related stuff is what they do maybe 80% of the time. Then again, bringing 20 people to office just to keep 1 or 2 managers happy is also a waste. Greater than the cynic in me says execs can't force this decision because the senior management simply will come back and say we cannot be this productive with a fully remote team anymore. I don't know, but I for one cannot understand the irrational exuberance behind RTO. Remote work does require shift of habits, training can help, maybe a niche here for company doing the training? But it still takes time and effort if you did it in person for last 10 to 20 years. We used to spend $400 a month on gasoline because we both commuted 25 minutes each way. During the pandemic that was down to about $100 a month. And when we did have to go somewhere, the traffic was so much lower, so less wasting gas in stop and go traffic. I'm supposed to go in 3 days a week. In reality I go in once a week for a few hours and no one cares as 90% of the people on my project are in other offices. I told my manager what is the point of driving in to put on my headset and disturb everyone with my meetings while trying to block out the noise of everyone else on their meetings? He couldn't argue with that, so he hasn't pushed the in-office thing. When I had an office with a door and window I liked going in. It was a good mix of seeing people and privacy. I hate the 1 year of cubicle stuff after 15 years in an office with a door. Then the pandemic hit and I really hate cubicles even more. Could I ask what you were driving that 50 minutes of commuting a day would lead to $200 in fuel? When I was doing the same during the pandemic, similar commute time, my car making 21-ish mpg was only needing about $100 in gas a month. About 10 miles with more than a dozen stoplights. So, if we gave you your office back and ripped out all the cubicles, maybe even had a nice view, would you be happy spending the $400 again? I'm honestly curious where you think the value/cost split is in this equation for you. I live in a small apartment a short train ride from the office. It isn't big enough to work from home. If I worked from home I'd get a big house in the suburbs, and buy a car to get around. My environmental footprint would be much bigger. Edit, if I didn't have kids I'd totally have a beach house and a mountain house to live in. Maybe in different countries too. If I'm reading this correctly, you choose to live in a small apartment, suffer the commute on a train, and work in an office you'd prefer not to be in, just so you don't have to move to a big house in the suburbs with your kids. Thanks for putting this concisely. I used to live in a small apartment and walk to work. Then when my wife and I both had to work from home, we ended up renting a big house because we still needed offices to work. Maybe there are some jobs and personal situations that allow one to WFH without additional space and costs, really though it's just shifting space around, often very inefficiently. I completely agree. Ever since WFH started I'm feeling this gravitational pull away from the city center because of cost of living and space considerations. If salary takes a nosedive this will become untenable for many. Mountains of research show that this will increase total emissions. It would be one thing if the US was developing medium-density suburban cores, but that seems to be on the table in very, very few places. And that's fantastic for you, and I'm happy for you, but your WFH footprint will remain small and on average the total environmental footprint will go down because you aren't the average person. You happen to be an anomaly and we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Also, working from home would reduce the demand for the train routes. This in turn would mean that the route would be scheduled more sparsely, or even discontinued. Which would force more people to use a car. And this is why management and operation of public utilities should be policy-driven rather than profit-driven. Greater than if I worked from home I'd get a big house in the suburbs, and buy a car to get around. My environmental footprint would be much bigger. For me, WFH means I can walk/bike/drive to the local coffee shop or public library to work, but still live in a cramped studio apartment. Perhaps it doesn't apply to you, but it's natural for many, most, to require larger or smaller places as needs of immediate family evolve. I don't know that larger places are necessarily optional or environmentally worse. Your alternative sounds a little bit weird, given that you only need 5 to 8 square m. of extra space to work from home, maybe one more room. It doesn't sound like a small apartment versus big house plus car alternative, instead it sounds like WFH is a privilege and I want to live like privileged class then. Similarly, I often wonder why cities don't promote local telecommuting over building expensive public transportation infrastructure. Building 1 kilometer of subway costs anywhere from around $100 million to $1.6 billion, and then requires subsidies to run. Why not use this money to provide incentives for people to telecommute? And while some might say, but then people who rely on public transit for things other than commuting to work would be hurt, note that most public transit currently doesn't serve those people well because it's focused on work-related commuting patterns. Example: greater than, subway, then requires subsidies to Rooney. Wish we used the same logic for roads/streets as well. Except for toll roads, which only get a partial subsidy, roads are fully subsidized by the taxpayer. Since others get fully subsidized roads for their private vehicles, I argue public transit should be fully subsidized as well. Yeah, let's increase car dependence. Great idea. If people are mainly working from home, then we can redirect public transit from business parks or whatever towards places people still want to go, for example shopping, nightlife, events, but without a car. Starving already often underfunded public transit is not the answer. Why not use the hundreds of millions spent on highways to subsidize people to work from home instead? Most commuters in North America are not using public transit but highways. BC local telecommuting means there's no city center, no commercial traffic there, no business tax base. Look at what's happening to downtown SF. You can debate whether it's taking the city in a good direction or not, but few elected officials are going to endorse their city becoming smaller or having less income. Not all jobs can be done by telecommuting. It's a great solution for office work, but it doesn't work so well for manufacturing, retail or the service industry. Most public transit currently doesn't serve those people well because it's focused on work-related commuting patterns. Does it? Work-related travel is mostly during morning and late afternoon, but public transit also runs outside those hours. In my experience, public transit works quite well for non-commuting travel. Of course, this can vary wildly by country, but the claim that public transit only really serves commuters is not universally true. Similarly, I often wonder why cities don't promote local telecommuting over building expensive public transportation infrastructure. Because if they promote it too much, people move far away and the city loses the tax base. One extreme example is New York City. They have a 3.5% income tax. If you move into next door NJ or CT, the city loses that 3.5% income. I don't think expensive public transport is the problem. It can be crucial for some people. The fact that the article says some people need short stops on trips to and from work, short distance trips and a higher frequency of trips just means the public transport needs to be tweaked, not completely scrapped. This would appear to go into a much more fundamental questions about our society. Currently, when we see recession, we can increase government spending. This is usually done in infrastructure. We give people a job, and in return we get infrastructure. Nice. But if we agree that infrastructure does not provide that amount of value, we either need to figure other large-scale projects that 1. Provide value and 2. Requires a lot of manual labor, or we need to not found money distribution in work. An alternative could be you be here. And like driving, you often can't scale to meet demand. Both also need replacements after XKM. Giant office buildings also have a giant impact. Those resources could have been homes or extra rooms to work from. Then there is the whole fast food and fast everything along the road and various industries that busy themselves with appearance. Because employers do not really care about the environment. They're pretending to because they think supporting the cause positively impacts their revenue. When they have a choice to make an impact, like now, they pass. The environmental argument is sometimes used, but often, and often correctly, seen as someone who prefers remote work dishonestly slapping an environmental argument on it. Dishonest, because the actual primary reason they're pushing for it doesn't match the stated primary reason. It isn't as clear-cut as you'd expect either. One argument I've heard is that in areas where air conditioning is a large contributor to energy use and homes are poorly insulated, someone staying home and cooling their home with an inefficient, small air conditioner may be worse than having that person commute to an office instead. This argument is often generalized and sometimes dishonestly used by people who prefer office work to argue that teleworking is actually bad for the environment. I found a meta-study that claims vehicle miles traveled increase because people move further away, while the studies generally claimed a reduction in overall energy consumption. Several studies claim grossly exaggerated environmental impacts for streaming/data transfers. I don't remember seeing it misused to dismiss the environmental argument for teleworking, but it wouldn't surprise me to see it. The worst offender here is the Shift project, which overstated the results of their already flawed study by another factor of 8 in an interview, and then used that huge mistake to argue that their other mistakes aren't that relevant because they're small, compared to the initial mistake, not compared to their claimed impact. In the Bay Area in 2020 we had rolling blackouts in the summer because the electricity used by air conditioners put more stress on the grid than normal. It was not a particularly hot summer, we just had everyone working at home. Most of our housing stock is not particularly energy efficient. Whole house AC and heat instead of systems with multiple zones, big tanked water heaters, okay but not great insulation. I'd buy the idea that working from home lowers emissions and gasoline consumption but also increases the consumption of electricity and natural gas.
Hey guys, this is the Rogue YouTuber here. I recently had a big change in my life. I had a baby daughter. Here she is. If you could do me a favor and remember to hit the subscribe button and bang the bell, I'm hoping to really create a YouTube channel that really gets people excited and brings people the best, most interesting content collated from across the internet. I'm saving up to save my little girl to Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department. So please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.